She woke up chained in a psychiatric ward, but her whispered words would expose a crime no one dared to believe. Stay with us until the end, because the truth Valerie reveals will change everything you thought you knew. Valeria slowly opened her eyes, feeling as if the weight of the world was crushing her chest. Everything around her was cold and lifeless white. The cracked ceiling seemed to be the only witness to her confusion. When she tried to move, a chill ran down her spine. Hearing the sound of chains, she realized her hands were tied to the bed. She fought against the nausea and screamed, her hoarse voice echoing in the empty room. "Someone help me!" She called for help, but no one answered. In one corner, a barred window cast shadows on the floor. Outside, the sky seemed distant and unreachable, and Valeria felt that she was not only trapped in that place, but in something bigger, something she couldn't remember. The pain in her chest was like a knife. Trying to understand what was happening, Valeria looked at her own body and noticed marks on her arms, bruises, injections. "What did you do to me?" she whispered, as tears ran down her face. Minutes later, in front of the window by the door, two nurses stopped and looked at her. They didn't say anything, but the way they looked at her made Valeria feel a lump in her throat. It was as if she weren't human, pity in the eyes of one, contempt in the other. One of them muttered something inaudible before leaving her alone again. "Why am I here? What happened to me?" Valeria asked herself. It all seemed like a blur, but there was a growing certainty that something terrible had happened. She touched her chest where the pain was strongest, as if trying to reach a memory that still didn't make sense. When silence returned, Valeria closed her eyes and made a promise to herself. "I will discover the truth, whatever it takes." The emptiness of that room seemed to devour her hope, but deep down, there was something that drove her forward, a feeling that the danger was still close, and that she was the only one who knew it. Shortly after, Valeria was dragged into a room with oppressive white walls, an atmosphere that exuded a coldness that made her heart race. Sitting on a hard chair, she tried to find words to explain, to convince. She needed to be heard. "Something horrible is happening. I don't know how I got here, but there's something wrong. Mateo. He was the one." The memory of that name hit her like a bolt of lightning. Mateo. That name seemed to carry something dark. But what exactly? The answer was buried in the fog of her memory. The doctor, with a folder in his hands, sighed deeply. "Valeria, you are very agitated. That is not good for your recovery." His voice was calm, almost sweet, but it had a condescending tone that made Valeria's blood boil. "Recovery? Recovery from what? I'm not sick. I'm not crazy. I'm trapped here against my will. Please listen to me. You have to believe me." The doctor's expression changed. The slight trace of patience gave way to something colder, more distant. He put the folder aside and gestured to the nurses waiting at the door. "Valeria, you're here for your own safety. We want to help you, but you need to calm down. No, you don't understand. He's going to escape. He's going to do it again. I saw him. I saw everything." Valeria was desperate now, her whole body trembling as hot tears ran down her face. The nurses approached. She tried to back away, but she was cornered. "Please listen to me. I'm telling the truth. He's dangerous." The words came out like screams, but no one seemed to hear the genuine fear in her voice. One of the nurses held her arm while the other prepared an injection. "No, don't do this to me," Valeria pleaded, struggling with all her strength, but her movements were weak compared to their strength. "This is for your own good, Valeria," said the doctor emotionlessly, as Valeria's eyes filled with despair. The needle pierced her skin, and a numbing sensation began to take over her body. The room began to spin, and her vision became increasingly blurred. Before losing consciousness, one last sentence escaped her lips in a whisper. "You have to know the truth. He's going to silence me." The doctor's eyes met those of the nurse, Camila, who seemed to hesitate for a moment. What had Valeria said? Could it be possible that there was something there? Something that no one wanted to hear? As Valeria fainted, the room fell into a heavy silence. But somewhere hidden in the stifled words of that discredited woman was a secret that would change everything. Back in the room, the pain was unbearable, but it did not come from Valeria's body. It was her soul that ached. The medication slowly numbed her senses, transforming the agony into a cold and paralyzing emptiness. Her eyes were closed, but her mind, though clouded, insisted on resisting. There was something she needed to remember, something that no one could ignore. Lying in bed with slow and irregular breathing, Valeria murmured disconnected words between moans and sobs. Some phrases escaped, laden with a truth that seemed to burn inside her. They have to know the truth. He wasn't who he said he was. The nurses, busy with their tasks, barely glanced at her. To them, she was just another delirious patient, another broken soul lost in that place, forgotten by the world. But in the corner of the room, Camila, the nurse who had doubted before, paused. Something in Valeria's words made her shudder. Who was not who he said he was? Camila whispered to herself as she pretended to adjust a file. She looked at Valeria with curiosity and a little fear, but soon turned away, as if trying to understand was too dangerous. Valeria, caught between reality and her medicated body, fought against the darkness that threatened to devour her. The images in her mind were fragmented like a puzzle that refused to be completed. A smile that had once been welcoming now seemed threatening. A familiar face, but distorted by fear. Mateo, no, don't trust him, Valeria managed to whisper, her voice lost in the silence of the room. Her words fell on deaf ears, but in her heart she knew she had to keep trying. She needed to be heard. Why was no one paying attention? Why did her words seem to be absorbed by those white, forgotten walls? Valeria felt she was being silenced on purpose, and that only increased her determination. Although at that moment, the only fight she could wage was against the sleep induced by the medication. As Valeria slowly sank under the effect of the drugs, Camila took one last look at the sleeping patient before leaving the room. Why does this bother me so much? She doesn't seem to have any mental problems, she wondered as Valeria's words echoed in her mind. Night fell slowly, bringing with it a feeling of even more cruel isolation. The hospital at night seemed like a labyrinth of silence and shadows, and Valeria was alone in her white cell, her mind spinning in a whirlwind of disconnected memories and repressed fears. The name still floated on her lips, whispered like a forbidden secret. Mateo. Camila was restless. Valeria's words continued to echo in her mind. He was not who he said he was. The intensity of those words had shaken Camila, awakening in her an almost painful curiosity. Against all the rules, she decided to go to Valeria's room. Upon entering, Camila saw Valeria lying down, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, lost in a chasm of thoughts. She hesitated, but then took a deep breath and approached, her steps soft, almost imperceptible. Valeria called out softly, almost afraid to break the silence. Valeria blinked slowly, as if returning from another world. Her eyes, now glassy and red from crying so much, met Camila's. Tears welled up again, but she said nothing. Camila sat down on the side of the bed, ignoring her instinct to walk away. Earlier today, you said something about someone who wasn't who they said they were. She paused, observing every detail of Valeria's expression, searching for a truth that might be hidden. Who, Valeria? Who wasn't who they said they were? What happened? Valeria bit her lip as if speaking were a punishment. It was the kind of fear that only someone who has already lost everything feels. Finally, her voice came out trembling and almost inaudible. Mateo. Camila frowned. The name was familiar, but she couldn't remember. Why? Who is Mateo? She asked carefully. Valeria looked away, pressing her lips tightly together. Tears ran down her face as she muttered the man who destroyed everything, who did this to me, who made sure no one believed me. Camila felt a knot in her stomach as she listened to the pain in Valeria's words. There was something there, something terrible that needed to be uncovered, but she knew that forcing Valeria to say more would be useless at that moment. Valeria, I want to believe you, but you need to help me. Why did he do that? What did he do? Valeria shook her head, her face contorted in despair. If I say anything, they'll silence me like they did with Lucy. I'm sure that's why she disappeared. The name seemed to come out of nowhere, but it carried an immense weight, like a shadow falling over the conversation. Camila tried to ask, but Valeria had already closed herself off, her words drowned out by sobs. Camila sat in silence, her mind full of questions. Who was Mateo? Who was Lucy? And why did Valeria seem so tormented by those names? As she got up, Camila looked at Valeria one last time. I'll come back and listen to everything you want to tell me. Even if no one else believes you, I will. Valeria didn't answer, but her eyes, though filled with tears, sparkled for a brief moment. Perhaps for the first time, she had found someone willing to listen to her. As Camila left the room, something inside her told her that there was much more to this woman than met the eye. Valeria was alone in the room, but her mind was not. Every time she closed her eyes, connected images invaded her thoughts like pieces of a nightmare that made no sense. It was always the same beginning, a distant scream, the sound of something breaking, and blood, lots of blood. She held her head in her hands, trying to push the memories away, but the more she struggled, the clearer they became in the reflection of the muddy window pane. She saw something that wasn't there. Mateo. The smile that had once given her comfort now seemed sinister, almost mocking. The scenes came in fragments. A dimly lit room, a table with papers scattered about. Mateo's low, threatening voice arguing with other men. Valeria couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. They were plotting something dirty. Suddenly, she saw herself hiding behind a door, her eyes wide open. As she held her breath, she was listening to something she shouldn't have been. "You think you can betray me, Mateo?" A man's voice echoed in her mind. A sharp, loud sound, like a gunshot, made her jump. Valeria opened her eyes, gasping, but the sound continued to reverberate in her ears. She looked at her hands and swore she saw bloodstains that weren't there. "No, no!" she screamed, pushing the blankets away as if she could escape from that memory. The door to the room burst open, and a nurse entered, alarmed. "What's going on?" Valeria just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I saw something. He was there. Mateo. He took someone's life." The nurse tried to calm her down, but Valeria's words kept pouring out like an avalanche. "They were arguing. There was so much blood. I can't forget it. He was screaming. I saw everything. I saw what he did. But when?" Valeria looked up at the nurse. She realized that she was no longer listening. There was pity in her eyes, but also disbelief. It was as if Valeria were invisible, a soul screaming into the void. Valeria felt defeated, but she couldn't ignore what she had seen. That face, those voices, the sound of the gunshot. They were real, and even though her mind was fragmented, something in her heart told her that the truth was there, hidden in the shadows of the past. She had to stay silent while the nurse left, muttering something about yet another crisis. Valeria whispered to herself, "If I forget, no one else will know what he did." And with that, a dark determination began to grow within her. Mateo was not just a memory. He was a monster, and she was sure he had not finished what he had started. Camila walked down the hallway, the sound of her footsteps muffled by the oppressive silence of the hospital. The conversation with Valeria echoed in her mind. Mateo, murder, blood. Each word was like a knot tightening around her throat. Camila felt she had to tell what she had heard, although something inside her whispered that no one would believe her. Upon entering the staff room, Camila hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I think the patient in room 17 is trying to tell us something serious." The other nurses, sitting in worn chairs, barely looked up. One of them, Mark, let out a short laugh. "Valeria is always saying nonsensical things. This morning it was something about a conspiracy. Before that, she had seen death in a dream. It's always the same." Camila didn't insist, her heart racing. "This time it's different. She mentioned a murder. She said she saw blood. She seemed terrified." Another nurse, Patricia, turned around with a mocking smile. "Camila, you have to learn to separate delirium from reality. That woman is crazy, like everyone here. She thinks the whole world is against her." Camila felt her face flush. What if it's not delirium? What if she really saw something? "We can't just ignore her." Mark shook his head, laughing dismissively. "Camila, do you have any idea how many stories like that we hear every day? These people are here for a reason. Their minds create these things, and we're only here to care for them, not to listen to conspiracy theories." His words cut her like a knife. Camila fell silent, looking at the tired, indifferent faces around her. She knew they weren't listening to Valeria because they didn't want to believe her. It was easier to dismiss her words as hallucinations than to admit that maybe there was something terrible hidden within those walls. "You're wrong," she muttered, almost to herself, before leaving the room and walking down the hallway, away from the judgmental stares. Camila leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. What would she do now? Valeria seemed to be drowning in pain, and her words carried something that Camila couldn't ignore. The young nurse looked up at the ceiling, feeling tears burn in her eyes. Why was it so hard for others to see what she saw? There was something about Valeria's pain that seemed real, and above all, Camila knew that if she didn't believe her, no one else would. As she returned to Valeria's room, a question echoed in her mind. What if Valeria was telling the truth? What would happen to her alone in that place if no one was willing to listen to her? Valeria was sitting in the corner of the room, hugging her knees as if she could protect herself from something invisible but terribly real. The silence of the hospital surrounded her, but inside her, a storm was raging. Her mind replayed the fragments of her memory, all of which crushed her like an endless wave. Suddenly, she heard footsteps. The door opened, revealing two nurses with impassive expressions. One of them was carrying a tray of medication. "It's time for your medicine," said the nurse emotionlessly, as if she were talking to a machine and not a person. Valeria didn't scream. She backed away, her eyes filled with panic, but also determination. "I'm not taking anything. You don't understand what's going on?" The nurses exchanged quick glances, as if they were used to this kind of resistance. But Valeria continued, her voice rising in desperation. "You have to listen to me. Mateo locked me up. He wanted to silence me because I saw everything. Valeria, please, don't make this more difficult," said one of the nurses, approaching her with practiced calm. "Difficult?" Valeria shouted, her voice echoing in the room. "You think I'm crazy? But I saw what he did there, and then he locked me up so no one would know. You think this is a delusion, but it's real." Her scream cut through the air, but instead of provoking a reaction, it was swallowed up by the emptiness of the room. The nurses seemed deaf to the pain in her voice, ignoring the legitimate panic that overflowed from her. They approached with the medication while Valeria struggled, tears streaming down her face. "Why doesn't anyone believe me? Why doesn't anyone want to hear the truth? I'm telling the truth, please. Someone listen to me." As they held her down to give her the injection, her words began to fade, mixed with bland ones. "Mateo is going to escape. You are helping him. You don't understand." At the door, Camila watched the scene with a heavy heart. Every word Valeria uttered was like a knife cutting through the silence and piercing her soul. She knew she shouldn't intervene, but what she was seeing was more than just an outburst. It was someone crying out for help, someone desperately trying to be heard. When the medication began to take effect, Valeria collapsed onto the bed, still muttering, "I saw everything." Her voice grew weaker and weaker until it disappeared completely. Camila stood there for a moment, looking at this broken woman, wondering, what if she's telling the truth? If we don't listen to her, who will? As the nurses left, Camila approached Valeria and whispered, "I'm listening." Valeria didn't respond, but a tear rolled down the corner of her closed eye, as if even unconscious she had felt that promise. A promise that could be her only hope. Camila was sitting in a metal chair in the employee dressing room, the lights flickering slightly above her. The clock read shortly after midnight, but she knew she wouldn't be able to sleep. Valeria's words echoed in her mind, each one laden with a pain that Camila couldn't ignore. They wanted to silence her, because she had seen everything. Holding the cell phone in her hands, she looked at the locked screen, undecided. What she was about to do went against everything she had learned in the psychiatric hospital. She should simply follow the rules, work her hours, and go home. No questions asked, no questioning. But now she knew she couldn't continue to ignore it. "What if she's telling the truth?" she whispered to herself, as if the words needed to be said aloud to carry weight. Camila dialed the number for the local police station, her hands shaking. For a moment, she paused, her thumb hovering over the call button. What if I am exaggerating? What if Valeria really is hallucinating? She shook her head, trying to push the doubt away. But then she remembered Valeria's gaze, that empty, desperate look, and made her decision. When she heard the call connect, Camila straightened her posture. Although her heart was beating so fast that it seemed to echo in the room, a male voice answered on the other end. "Central office. Good evening." Camila took a deep breath. "Good evening. My name is Camila. I'm a nurse at St. Lucie Psychiatric Hospital. I'm calling because I think one of our patients may have information about a crime." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A crime?" the voice replied skeptically. "Yes. She mentioned seeing something related to a murder." Camila tried to keep her voice steady, but each word seemed to weigh a ton. "The name she mentioned is Mateo. I don't know much else, but something in the way she spoke, in the pain of her words, I think she could be telling the truth." The police officer sighed, and Camila could almost feel his disbelief. "Ma'am, these patients often say nonsensical things. It's not uncommon for them to make up stories." "I know," Camila interrupted, her voice full of emotion. "But what if this time it's not a story? What if she really saw something? It doesn't cost anything to investigate, right?" There was another moment of silence before the police officer's voice came back, now a little more attentive. "All right. We'll send someone to investigate. What's her name?" "Valeria. Valeria Rogers. And for the record, I don't want them to know it was me who called. I want this report to be anonymous." After hanging up, Camila felt a strange weight on her chest. Had she done the right thing? Or had she just exposed Valeria to more discredit and pain? As she got up to go back to work, she glanced at her watch. Now all that was left was to wait. But deep down, she knew the wait would be unbearable, and that this decision might be the beginning of something much bigger than she could imagine. Little did Camila know that by making that call, she had lit a spark in the deep darkness, and that spark would bring answers that no one was prepared for. The sound of Detective Javier's leather shoes echoed down the long hallway of the psychiatric hospital. The dim light from the fluorescent lamps gave the place an oppressive feeling, as if the air outside was heavier. Javier maintained a serious expression, but inside he was skeptical. Another delusional story, he probably thought. But something about the call he received made him come anyway. After speaking with an employee and entering the room where Valeria was, he found a woman who seemed to have been broken by the world. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, with her shoulders hunched, her eyes sunken and red from crying so much. There was a fragility in her posture, but when she looked up and saw Javier, something changed. For a moment her eyes shone with a mixture of hope and fear. "Are you from the police?" Valeria asked, her voice trembling. "Detective Javier," he replied, taking a diary out of his coat pocket. "They called me. They said you wanted to talk about something important." Valeria hesitated, her trembling hands clutching the fabric of her clothes as if it were a shield. Javier noticed the tension and tried to soften his approach. "Look, I just want to understand. You said someone threatened you. Who was it?" She took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. "Mateo, my husband." The words came out like knives, each one cutting something inside her. Javier raised an eyebrow. "And why would he threaten you?" Valeria looked at her hands, as if the answers were engraved on her palms. Tears began to fall again as her broken voice filled the silence. "He had secrets, things no one knew about. I saw things he did, horrible things. I couldn't let him talk. He said that if I told anyone, I would end up like Lucy." "Lucy," Javier leaned forward. A new name, another piece of the puzzle. Valeria nodded. The tears now flowed freely. She was his secret. Javier wrote down every word, but he felt the weight of what Valeria was saying, the pain in her voice, the terror in her eyes. Everything seemed more real than he had expected. He took a deep breath before asking, "Why do you think he would do that? Why would he go so far to silence you?" Valeria finally lifted her face, and in that moment, Javier saw something different. It wasn't just pain, it was determination, because she had dark secrets, things that no one could know. If she spoke, it would be the end of her and anyone else involved. The words hung in the air, laden with mystery and despair. Javier closed his diary and looked at Valeria more closely. There was something there, something he couldn't ignore. "You know that if you tell the truth, this is going to cause a big impact, right?" he asked, his voice now softer. almost gentle. Valeria nodded, tears still rolling down her cheeks. "I don't care. I just want someone to know. I want someone to believe me." Javier was silent for a moment, evaluating her. He knew that many cases like this led nowhere, but something in those words, in the intensity of her pain, moved him. He couldn't deny that the name Mateo sparked something bigger, something he didn't yet fully understand. When he got up to leave, he looked at Valeria one more time. "I'm going to investigate where this Mateo is and see if there's anything we can use. But you need to be patient." Valeria nodded, clenching her hands tightly as if she were clinging to her last hope of being saved. "Thank you," she whispered as she left the hospital. Javier couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than he imagined. Who was Mateo, and what was he hiding? The next day, his conversation with Valeria seemed to echo in Javier's mind as he walked back to the hospital for another round of questions. There was something in her words that he couldn't ignore, something more than fear. It was truth mixed with desperation. But what? And how did it connect to the name Mateo, which he had already heard in previous investigations? In the cold room, lit by dim lights, Valeria sat with her hands folded in her lap, a shadow of exhaustion covering her face. But when Javier entered, something in her eyes seemed to awaken. He was perhaps the only person who could save her. "Detective," Valeria began hesitantly, "I need to talk about something important that I didn't mention yesterday." Javier sat down in front of her, leaning slightly forward so she knew he was listening. "Speak. I'm here to hear you." She took a deep breath, as if the words she was about to say were a crushing weight. "Have you ever heard of the house by the river?" Upon hearing the name, Javier froze inside. Something in him seemed to break. He tried to keep his face neutral, but his eyes betrayed a moment of recognition. Valeria saw it, and it was enough to confirm what she feared. "You know that place," she said in a low but full of certainty. Javier tried to dodge the question, but Valeria's words dragged him back. "Why are you talking about that place?" he asked, keeping his voice steady, but unable to hide his nervousness. "Because that's where it all happened," Valeria replied, the pain evident in every syllable. "Mateo took me there, him and his men. That's where they did horrible things. That's where I saw the blood, where I heard the screams, and where he locked me up." Javier clenched his fists, his heart pounding. The house by the river was a place that had come up in an investigation weeks earlier, when bodies were found in an isolated spot near a river that meandered through a rural area. But the case was not solved. There was not enough evidence, and the clues seemed to lead to a dead end. "I need you to tell me more," he said, trying to keep his voice under control. "Who was there with Mateo? What exactly did you see?" Valeria lowered her head, her eyes filled with tears. I don't remember everything, just flashes. Mateo arguing with someone, and then darkness. But one thing I do know is that that place is a tomb of secrets. He told me that if I talked, I'd end up in jail." Lucy, that name again. Javier knew that something bigger was going on, something dark buried deep in Mateo's lies. "Valeria," Javier began, choosing his words carefully. "Are you sure that the house by the river is the place completely safe?" She looked up at him, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll never forget that place, detective. It's etched in my memory." Javier stood up abruptly, feeling the weight of what he had just heard. He needed to go back to the house by the river. There were questions that needed answers. But as he left the room, a doubt tormented him. How far did this secret go? And how many lives had it already destroyed? Valeria, now alone, closed her eyes and let the tears flow. She knew that by mentioning that name, she had exposed something dangerous, but it was the only way for someone to finally hear her truth. The wind broke the silence of the night as Javier parked the car at the entrance of a poorly lit dirt road. The dim moonlight illuminated the deteriorated facade of the house by the river, a building forgotten by time with broken windows and walls stained by moisture. He took a deep breath before getting out of the car, the weight of what was to come bearing down on his shoulders. That place had a silence that seemed to scream. It was the second time he had set foot there in a short time. The first time had been to investigate a crime scene that had everything to be filed away: abandoned bodies, dried blood, signs of a violent struggle. But now, after listening to Valeria, He knew he had to look beyond the obvious. Something was hidden there, something that had not yet been discovered. With the flashlight in his hand, Javier crossed the grounds. The sound of his footsteps on the dry leaves was the only thing that broke the oppressive silence. Upon entering the house, the smell of urine and dried blood hit him hard, like a reminder of the lives that had been brutally cut short there. The furniture was scattered, the marks of the fight still visible, broken tables, broken glass scattered on the floor. He passed the flashlight through the main room, where the police tape was still stuck to the floor, moving gently with the wind coming in through the cracks. But nothing seemed different. Nothing seemed new. "Why did you bring me here?" Valeria muttered to herself, her low voice mingling with the echo of the house. Then something caught his attention, something he hadn't noticed the first time. In a corner of the room, there was a large bookcase. Seemingly out of place, there were recent marks on the floor, as if it had been dragged. Javier approached, his heart racing. Behind that bookcase, something was waiting for him. With considerable effort, he pushed the heavy piece of furniture aside, revealing a wooden door on the floor. The air there was even denser, laden with a smell he recognized: fear and death. He hesitated, his hands trembling slightly before descending the stairs into the darkness. Javier felt a chill run down his spine, but he forced his feet to move forward. It was as if the weight of all the lives lost in that place were trapped down there, waiting to be revealed. When he reached the basement, the light from his flashlight illuminated a small, claustrophobic room. Inside, he found a table covered with messy papers, yellowed photographs, and bloodstains that told stories of violence. On a shelf, there were old weapons and bags of money. But what caught his attention most, was a black diary, forgotten right in the center of the table, as if it were waiting for him. Javier picked up the diary carefully. On the first few pages were handwritten notes, short sentences, and names he didn't recognize but seemed important. He turned to the next page and saw something that made him freeze. Valeria's name was written next to the word witness, and below that was the name Lucy, circled as if it were a threat, and swallowed. His heart was beating so fast that it felt like a drum inside his chest. "Who are you?" Javier whispered, staring at the words as if they could suddenly speak. The sound of something moving upstairs made him freeze. He turned off the flashlight, his heart racing. Someone was there. Javier knew he had to leave, but he also knew he couldn't leave the diary behind. He tucked it inside his jacket and climbed the stairs carefully and quietly exited through the back door. As he walked back to the car, with adrenaline rushing through his veins, he knew that this diary not only confirmed Valeria's suspicions, it could be the key to everything. But he also understood that by taking it, he had crossed a line. Now he was involved, and the truth would be much more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The black diary was in his hands, and Javier knew that he was holding more than just paper. He held in his hands a truth that could destroy lives, including his own. As he leafed through the yellowed and worn pages, the handwritten words came to life, each sentence laden with secrets that should never have been revealed. Hasty notes filled the margins of the pages, codes, dates, places. Javier felt the tension growing in his chest with each line he read. But what disturbed him most was a single word that appeared repeatedly, circled and underlined: plan. Javier turned to the next page, and the world seemed to freeze. There were photographs hidden among the pages showing people in discreet meetings, tense faces, calculating looks. Some of the photos were of Mateo, but what caught his attention most was the cold, calculating expression on the man's face. There was no love there. He was a manipulator, a predator among the images. Javier found something that seemed out of place. An old photo of a young woman with sad eyes holding a necklace with a small charm. He turned the photo over and saw the name Lucy, written by hand. "Who are you?" he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. Amidst the jumble of notes, a scribbled phrase seemed to scream at him. "If she talks, the plan falls apart. Do what needs to be done to Lucy." Javier closed the diary tightly, as if he wanted to silence the echo of the words. He knew that Lucy wasn't just a name. She was part of the secret, part of the puzzle that explained why Valeria was trapped in that hospital, screaming to be heard. Back at the hospital, Javier looked at Valeria, now paler and more fragile than ever, but her eyes were alive, filled with a pain that seemed to scream every second. "I was in the house," Valeria said, placing the diary on the table between them. "I found this, and I found her name, Lucy." Upon hearing the name, Valeria tensed up. Her breathing stopped for a moment, and tears began to roll down her cheeks before she could say anything. "So now you know," she whispered in a broken voice. Mateo had a secret, one he would do anything to protect. Javier leaned forward, encouraging her deeply, as if he were about to tear open a wound that had never healed. Lucy was his sister, but no one knew she existed. Mateo never talked about her. He hid her as if she were a shame, a burden, but she knew things he did. She knew his secrets, and his voice broke, and he began to cry. "Why would he do anything to her? What did she know?" Javier asked, feeling that he was beginning to understand the depth of the abyss into which he had entered. Valeria looked up, and her expression was one of pure despair. She knew too much, and he knew that if Lucy spoke, everything would collapse. Valeria's words hung heavy in the air, and Javier felt a growing anger in his chest. Lucy wasn't just a name. She was a crucial piece in the web of lies and violence that Mateo had woven. But one question remained unanswered. What exactly did Lucy know? As Javier closed the diary and prepared to leave, Valeria took him by the arm, her eyes filled with an urgency he couldn't ignore. "Don't let him get away, Javier. Don't let him hurt more people." Javier nodded, but deep down, he knew that finding the truth would not be easy, because now he was not only facing Mateo, he was facing the shadows of a past that still had a lot to say. When Javier returned to the police station and investigated Lucy, he discovered that she had been admitted to the same sanatorium as Valeria, but there were no records of her discharge, and that couldn't be a coincidence. Javier felt the weight of the diary in his hands as he walked toward the hospital's dead archive. Every page of that diary was a muffled cry, an accusation that seemed to beg to be unearthed. The mention of Lucy was the thread he needed to follow, but where to start? It was like looking for a ghost that had been carefully erased. He knew the answers were there, hidden in the cold corridors of the hospital where Valeria had been confined. This was more than a coincidence. Lucy and Valeria were connected by something deeper than just Mateo's name. He could feel it in the archive. He found an elderly nurse, Carmen, who had been working at the hospital for decades. Her face was marked by time, but her eyes reflected the wisdom of someone who had witnessed many stories unfold there. When he asked her about old records, Javier didn't have to insist much. Carmen took out a box of papers, forgotten in a dusty corner. "These are from patients who were admitted in recent years," she said. "No one else looks at this. For many, these stories are already dead." Javier checked the records carefully, the name Lucy burning in his mind. When he finally found her file, he felt a knot in his stomach. There was Lucy, admitted at age 24, diagnosed with severe emotional disorders. He looked at Carmen, who was watching from a distance. "Do you remember her?" Carmen frowned her brow, trying to bring back buried memories. "I remember a very quiet young woman, always sitting in a corner holding a necklace with a small charm. She hardly spoke to anyone. But now that you mention it, there was something strange." Javier leaned in attentively. What was strange? Carmen took a deep breath, her gaze lost in memories. No one ever visited her. It was as if she had no family, but from time to time, a man would show up. He always came at night when the hospital was emptiest. Tall, with dark hair and piercing eyes, he always seemed nervous, looking over his shoulder. "Do you remember a name by chance?" "Was it this man?" Javier asked, showing her a photo, already suspecting the answer. Carmen shook her head. "He never introduced himself, but I never forget a face, and I'm sure it was him. That's the man who came to see Lucy." Carmen's words hung in the air like a blow. Javier closed the file, feeling the weight of the connection. Mateo not only knew about Lucy, he was directly related to her. He visited her. But why? To protect her or to control her? "Is there something else?" Carmen continued with a tone of doubt in her voice. Shortly before she disappeared, Lucy seemed more frightened than ever. One day she told one of the nurses, "If I disappear, It's because he wanted it that way. Please don't let him do to others what he did to me." No one paid any attention, because those people tend to say nonsensical things, and after that we never saw her again. We think she's run away. Javier felt a knot in his stomach. Lucy had not only disappeared, she had been silenced. The same pattern was now repeating itself with Valeria. When he left the archive, Carmen's words continued to echo in his mind. If I disappear, it's because he wanted it that way. He knew he was closer to the truth, but he also knew that the closer he got, the greater the danger. And as he walked through the gloomy corridor, he couldn't help thinking that Mateo wasn't just a manipulative man, he was a predator, and Javier needed to stop him before another woman was devoured by his dark secrets. Camila was in Valeria's room, sitting next to her, while the woman stared at the floor, as if the words she needed to say were too heavy to lift. The silence between them was filled only by the distant sound of footsteps in the hospital corridors. Camila knew that Valeria had something important to say, something that was consuming her inside, but it seemed that the pain was too great to express. "Valeria," Camila began in a soft but firm voice, "I want to understand. I want to help you, but you have to tell me what Mateo did to you." Valeria slowly raised her eyes, and Camila saw years of pain and fear reflected in her gaze. It was as if Valeria was carrying the weight of a world that no one else could see. She held Camila's hands tightly, as if that contact were her only anchor. "Mateo wasn't just my husband," Valeria began, her voice trembling. "He was my jailer. He kept me as an emotional prisoner. He controlled me in every way possible. No matter what I said or did, he always found a way to make me feel like I was crazy, that I had no way out." Camila squeezed Valeria's hands in a gesture of support, feeling the weight of her words. Why did she do that? What did she want to hide? Valeria took a deep breath, tears already rolling down her cheeks. "Because I knew too much. I saw things he wanted to bury. He told me that if I spoke, if I tried to tell anyone, I would end up like Lucy." The name echoed like thunder in the silence of the room, and Camila felt a chill. "Who is Lucy?" Valeria hesitated, as if simply mentioning Lucy was dangerous. Lucy was his sister, but no one knew. Mateo never talked about her to anyone, as if she didn't exist. "I only found out because he used me to keep everything quiet. He told me that if I tried to escape, I would end up like her, disappeared, forgotten." Camila felt her heart tighten. Valeria wasn't just telling a story. She was bringing to light an open wound, a pain that had been ignored for too long. Why did no one ever talk about her? Valeria. Why did no one do anything? Valeria laughed, but it was a bitter laugh, full of suffering, because Mateo was good at hiding things. He knew how to manipulate people. He knew how to make everyone believe him. He was charismatic. Camila made everyone think he was a saint, while he destroyed everything around him. Camila held Valeria tighter, promising her. Valeria cried, but there was something new in her eyes, a spark of hope. Meanwhile, Javier was surrounded by old files, trying to piece together the puzzle. He had requested all possible records on Lucy, but what he found was a terrifying void. It was as if Lucy had been erased from existence. He investigated further to advance his research, but what he found was what he already knew, an initial record of admission to the psychiatric hospital. However, after a few weeks, the document simply ended. No official discharge, no transfer, nothing. Javier felt his stomach churning as he read the few remaining notes. Patient shows extreme fear, repeatedly mentions him, refuses to give further details. At the end of the file, a solitary note caught his attention. Patient, absent. Investigation not initiated. Javier slammed the file shut, his blood boiling. Absent? What do you mean, absent? They didn't investigate her disappearance. He called Carmen, the senior nurse who had helped him before. "Carmen, I need you to tell me something. Do you remember what happened? Why wasn't there an investigation when she disappeared?" No one looked for her. On the other end of the line, Carmen's voice sounded hesitant, almost guilty. "Javier, back then, things were different. The word of a man like our director was worth more than that of any woman. He said that Lucy had run away, that you were unstable, and that it would be better to leave her alone. No one questioned it. "And no one found it strange?" asked Javier, trying to remain calm. Carmen sighed, and Javier could feel the weight of guilt in her voice. There were rumors. The nurses talked about strange noises the night she disappeared. Screams. But the next day, that man in the photo appeared, smiling, saying that she had run away and that he was handling it. Who was going to question him? Javier was silent, processing what he had just heard. Lucy hadn't disappeared. They had simply silenced her, and Mateo had made sure that no one would look for her. When he hung up the phone, Javier looked at the black diary again, now more determined than ever. Lucy had been forgotten, but he would not allow that to continue, because he knew that what had happened to her was not just a thing of the past. It was the key to understanding everything Valeria was facing now, and for the first time, Javier felt that he was getting too close to something dangerous. But he could not back down. Valeria was lying in her hospital bed, with her eyes fixed on the ceiling, but her mind was elsewhere. Camila's words, Javier's questions, and painful memories accumulated and intertwined. Then a specific memory began to emerge like a whisper from the depths of her mind. It was Lucy's voice. Valeria could see her clearly now, as if she were in front of her again. It was a cold night, and that they were sitting in a dark corner of the psychiatric hospital. Lucy was holding a necklace with a small charm, playing with it, as if it were her last source of comfort. There was something desperate in Lucy's eyes, something that Valeria could now fully understand. "You must listen to me, Valeria. You must believe me," Lucy said with a trembling but determined voice. "He will never let you go. He is more dangerous than you can imagine." Valeria remembered hesitating at that moment. "But he's your brother. Why would he do something so horrible? He says he only wants what's best for me." Lucy took Valeria's hands tightly, as if she wanted to transfer all the weight of her pain to her through that contact. "That's what he does. He makes you believe he's everything you need. But behind that, he's a monster. He ruined my life, and now he's ruining yours." The memory was so vivid that Valeria could almost feel the warmth of Lucy's hands. She closed her eyes, letting the tears flow as the memory continued. "You must escape," Valeria insisted. "Lucy, you must get out of here secretly. He can't know you're thinking about this. If he finds out..." Lucy's voice broke, but Valeria clearly remembered the look she gave her, a look that conveyed fear and love at the same time. Lucy was warning her, begging her. Valeria whispered into the emptiness of the room. "I should have listened to you, Lucy. I should have escaped. Maybe you'd still be alive if I had." The next day, when Camila entered the room, she found Valeria sitting with her eyes swollen from crying so much. But there was something different about her, a grim determination shining in her eyes. Camila began, "Valeria," holding the nurse's hands firmly, "I need to tell you something that might help you understand everything." Camila nodded, leaning in to listen. She knew Valeria was about to share something profound, something that had been buried for two before Lucy disappeared. Valeria began, her voice thick with emotion. "She told me something about Mateo, something that could destroy him." Camila frowned, intrigued. "What did she tell you?" Valeria hesitated, as if saying the words would make them real. Lucy knew what Mateo was doing. She knew about his crimes, his business dealings, the people he hurt. She had proof. Camila said she had documents, something that showed everything, but she never managed to tell me where they were. "Why didn't she ask?" Camila asked, sensing the urgency in Valeria's words. "Because she was afraid," Valeria replied, as tears began to roll down her cheeks again. She said that if she told, he would find out. He always knew everything, and she knew that if he found out, she wouldn't stand a chance. Camila held Valeria by the shoulders, trying to give her strength. "Valeria, do you think that evidence still exists? That we can find it?" Valeria looked Camila, and for a moment a glimmer of hope crossed her face. If they exist, they're hidden, but Lucy wanted someone to find them. She wanted the world to know who he really was. Camila nodded, her heart tight. She felt the weight of what Valeria was sharing. Lucy wasn't just a victim. She was a key piece in a dangerous game, a game that Mateo was determined to win at any cost. Camila entered the room holding a folder with the old records that Javier had found. Her steps were uncertain, and the expression on her face betrayed that what she was about to say would not be easy. Valeria, sitting on the bed, looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Camila, what's wrong? Did something happen?" Valeria asked cautiously. Camila sat down next to her, placing the folder on her lap. "Valeria, there's something you need to know. Something about Lucy." The name made Valeria's heart race. "Lucy? What about her?" Camila took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "I was helping Javier investigate the old hospital records, and we discovered that Lucy was admitted here, in the same place as you." Valeria remained silent. The impact of the revelation hit her like a wave. She blinked several times, trying to process it. She was her. For how long? Camila opened the folder, showing the documents that confirmed Lucy's hospitalization. "A few months ago." Tears began to roll silently down Valeria's face. "She was here, so close to me, and I didn't know. She suffered so much." Camila placed a comforting hand on Valeria's shoulder, but didn't give up. "Valeria, even here, even alone, found the strength to fight. And now, you are continuing that fight. You are her voice." Valeria held the documents tightly, as if she could reach Lucy through them. "I won't let what happened to her be in vain. She deserves justice, and I'll do it for her." She nodded with tears in her eyes. "And I'll be by your side to make sure that happens," Valeria began. Camila knelt down beside the bed. "You told me Lucy had evidence. She knew something important. If she trusted you, she must have left a clue, something we can use." Valeria slowly raised her eyes, the shadow of a memory beginning to take shape. She wanted to believe that what Lucy had hidden was still there, waiting to be found. "I remember a place," she whispered. "Mateo is the villain in this story. Everything points to him, and now that he's dead, there's no reason to continue the case." The words hit Javier like a punch in the stomach. He knew that Mateo was only part of the story. The real problem was the network of power and corruption behind him. But hearing his boss dismiss everything so easily made him feel like he was losing control. "Boss, with all due respect, there's still more to discover," Javier insisted in a firm but urgent voice. "Mateo was just a piece of something much bigger. We have names in Lucy's diary, confessed accomplices. If we drop this now, the people he worked for will insist," Javier insisted in a firm but urgent voice. "The people he worked for," Javier insisted in a firm but urgent voice. "Mateo was just one piece of something much bigger. We have names in Lucy's diary, confessed accomplices. If we drop this now, they'll remain free to destroy more lives." The boss sighed, taking off his glasses and rubbing his eyes. "Javier, you're a good detective, but you're going too far. We don't have the resources to investigate a conspiracy that, in practice, is already over. Mateo is dead. We can't arrest a dead man, and without him, everything becomes speculation." Javier slammed his hand on the table, letting his frustration overflow. "Speculation, boss. Those people killed Lucy, manipulated Valeria, and used Mateo as a tool to keep their secrets. They're still operating in the shadows. This isn't speculation, it's a real threat." The chief stared at him seriously, but there was something more in his gaze. Fear. He took a deep breath before responding in a lower voice. "You think I don't know what's going on? I know what they do, Javier. But do you know who they are? They're not just common criminals. They have power, connections, and they won't hesitate to destroy anyone who gets in their way. I'm protecting you." Javier fell silent, feeling the weight of those words. He knew the chief was right. Those people had already shown what they were capable of, threatening Diego, manipulating the hospital, erasing evidence. Javier wasn't naive enough to believe that he and his family would be safe. "I understand your frustration," the boss continued, now in a more conciliatory tone. "But sometimes the best we can do is accept our limits. Mateo is dead. That's enough to close the case." Javier clenched his fists, every fiber of his being screaming to fight, to continue. But then he thought of his wife, his children, and the look Diego's eyes filled with fear for his family. He thought about what he would lose if he insisted on challenging a system that was already corrupt to the core. Finally, he muttered, "Okay." The chief nodded with satisfaction. "You did what you could, Javier, but now it's time to move on." Javier left the office with a heavy heart, feeling that he had betrayed not only Lucy and Valeria, but also himself. He knew the truth was out there, but the cost of searching for it was too high. That night, alone in his apartment, Javier looked at Lucy's diary, now stored in his drawer. He promised himself that one day he would find a way to expose everything, but for now, he needed to protect the people he loved. "I'm sorry, Lucy," he whispered. "I failed you." Valeria was sitting on a bench in the plaza. The afternoon sun warmed her face while the children played in the background. It was a scene of tranquility, but inside her, chaos remained. Her fingers nervously clutched Lucy's diary as if it were her last connection to her soul sister. She knew that the news Javier would bring would change everything again. Javier appeared in the distance, walking slowly. His expression was somber, like someone carrying a weight greater than he could bear. As he approached, he sat down next to Valeria without saying anything at first. He just looked ahead, his eyes fixed on the children running happily. "Do you have something to tell me?" Valeria finally broke the silence with a firm but hesitant voice. Javier sighed deeply, running his hand over his face. "Valeria, the case is closed." The words hung in the air, crushing. Valeria blinked, trying to process what she had just heard. "Closed? What do you mean, closed?" "They found Mateo's body," Javier explained in a tired tone. "For them, that's enough. He's the villain of the story, and with him dead, they think there's nothing more to be done. My boss was clear. I can't continue. If I insist, I could endanger my family." Valeria was silent for a moment, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she tried to hold back the tears. Finally, she looked at him, and her voice came out in a whisper, full of pain. "So that's it. He wins in the end." "No," Valeria replied, Javier turning to her. "He doesn't win. You're here. I'm here. And we know the truth. But now we have to be cautious. Those people are dangerous." Valeria pressed the diary to her chest, and the tears finally began to fall. "All this for nothing?" Javier placed a hand on her shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. "It wasn't for nothing. You brought Lucy's story to light. You gave her a voice when everyone else tried to silence her. That matters. And even if the world doesn't know it, I know it, and you know it." In the days that followed, Valeria tried to find meaning in the life she had left. She knew she could never tell her story completely. She could never expose the truth without risking her safety and that of those who helped her. But little by little, she began to rebuild what Mateo had tried to destroy. She rented a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood far from the hospital that had imprisoned her for so long. She began to paint, an activity Lucy had taught her to help her express her feelings. Each canvas was an attempt to transform her pain into something tangible, something she could control. But even in moments of peace, the fear was still there. Valeria found herself looking over her shoulder on busy streets, sleeping with the doors locked and a phone next to her bed. The shadows of Mateo and his network still haunted her. One afternoon, while organizing boxes in her new apartment, Valeria found Lucy's necklace carefully stored in an envelope. As she held it, she felt the tears coming back. But this time, they weren't just from sadness. They were from gratitude. Lucy whispered, clutching the necklace tightly, "I can't change what happened, but I promise your fight wasn't in vain. I'll keep living for you, and I'll never let them erase who you were that night." Valeria painted one last canvas, a landscape of a calm river with the sun setting in the background. In the corner of the painting, she wrote 2 words that she now carried with her every day: never forgotten. Reconciliation with life was painful, but deep down, Valeria knew that Lucy wanted that for her, that even with all the scars, she would continue fighting, breathing, living. Valeria looked around the small living room, decorated simply but cozily, with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The walls were covered with paintings she had done herself, serene landscapes but full of nuances, dark, as if each one carried a piece of her story. In the center of the room, a sign with golden letters announced the Lucy Foundation, voices that need to be heard. Creating the foundation had not been easy. Every step reminded her of her own pain, her struggle to be heard, everything that Mateo and his network had tried to destroy. But it was also an act of resistance, a way to ensure that Lucy would never be forgotten. Valeria stepped onto the small makeshift stage, holding a microphone in her trembling hands. The audience was small, friends, women with stories similar to hers, some curious local authorities, but at that moment, it was enough. She took a deep breath before beginning. Today is not just for Lucy. It is for all of us. It is for every woman who was silenced, ignored, called crazy for trying to tell the truth. Her words were full of emotion, each one resonating with the struggle she had lived through. Lucy taught me something that took me years to understand. Our pain is not weakness, it is strength. And when we unite, our voice can be stronger than any lie. The Lucy Foundation is for that, so that no woman feels alone, so that no story is forgotten. The audience applauded, but Valeria barely noticed. She looked at the poster again, Lucy's name shining like a promise. I did this for you, she thought, and for all those who still need a chance. After the opening event, Valeria was picking up the papers from the stage when she felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning around, she saw Camila smiling with a sparkle in her eyes. You were incredible, Camila said sincerely. Valeria smiled, but there was weariness in her eyes. I just hope this really helps, that it makes a difference. Camila crossed her arms, leaning forward slightly. It will. You've already done more than many would even attempt. But if I may say so, you don't have to do it alone. Valeria frowned, confused. What do you mean? Camila gave her a small smile and extended her hand. I mean that if you accept me, I want to help. I want to work with you here. I want to make sure this foundation reaches all women who need a voice. The words took Valeria by surprise. Camila had already been an invaluable support during her escape, but now she was offering to walk alongside her in a new chapter. Valeria felt her eyes fill with tears, but this time they were tears of gratitude. Camila, are you sure? This won't be easy, and there are still risks. Camila took Valeria's hand firmly, her smile now more determined. I know, but I also know this is the right thing to do. You inspired me, Valeria, and Lucy too. I want to be part of this fight. Valeria squeezed Camila's hand, her heart overflowing. Then welcome to the Lucy Foundation. As the two of them arranged the room, the sound of their soft laughter echoed like a flash of hope in the shadows. Because together, they knew they could transform pain into strength and silence into voices. It was a cloudy afternoon. The gray sky seemed to reflect the mixture of emotions that filled the Lucy Foundation hall. Valeria stood in front of a small audience of women of all ages who had found a place of support in the foundation, local authorities who supported the cause, and friends who had been by their side throughout the journey. In the center of the stage, a photograph of Lucy rested on an easel surrounded by flowers. Lucy's gaze, even in a simple image, seemed to convey all the strength of her struggle, all the pain of her sacrifice. Valeria took the stage, holding the microphone firmly. Her hands were shaking, but it was not out of fear. It was because of the weight of the words she was about to say. She looked at the audience, her eyes shining with emotion. Today is not only an important moment for the foundation, it is an important moment for me, for all the women here, and especially for Lucy. Her voice broke for a moment, but she took a deep breath and continued. Lucy was more than a victim. She was a force of nature. Even when the world tried to silence her, she found a way to leave her mark. And today we are here because of her, because she did not give up, even when everything seemed lost. Lost. Valeria paused, looking at Lucy's photograph. Silent tears began to roll down her face, but she did not try to hide them. The pain was there, but so was the strength. I carried a lot of guilt for not listening to Lucy in time, for not seeing the signs. But today, I understand that she never wanted me to be stuck in the past. Lucy wanted me to fight, to find the strength to move forward, for myself, for her, and for all of us. The room was completely silent. Everyone seemed to feel the weight of Valeria's words, the depth of her emotion, and that's what I'm doing. That's what all of you are doing by being here, because Lucy's fight is not over. Now we are her voice. Now we are her strength. Valeria took a deep breath, holding the microphone tighter. Her voice was clear and strong, filled with unwavering determination. I promise you, Lucy, that your fight will never be forgotten. I promise you that your voice will never be silenced. And I promise you that we will continue to fight together, so that no one else has to go through what you went through. The audience burst into applause, but Valeria barely heard them. Her eyes were fixed on Lucy's photograph, and in her heart she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. As she stepped off the stage, Camila hugged her tightly, and the two shared a smile full with emotion. You did it, Valeria. You gave her what she always wanted, a voice that the world cannot ignore. Valeria smiled, wiping away her tears. It wasn't just for Lucy, Camila. It was for all of us. As people got up to congratulate her, Valeria looked up at the sky through the window. The clouds were beginning to dissipate, and a ray of sunlight illuminated the room. It was as if, somehow, Lucy was there, finally free. And now we want to hear from you. If you were in Valeria's place, would you have the courage to face all this? Or if you were Javier, would you risk everything, even knowing that you could put your family in danger? Tell us your opinion in the comments. It's very important. And before you go, turn on the bell so you don't miss any new stories. We have many exciting stories that will touch your heart and make you reflect on life. Don't forget to click on the video that's on the screen right now. It's a story that has already made thousands of people cry and reconsider their decisions. You won't want to miss it. See you in the next video.